Jose Mourinho has been a fixture on the world football stage for the last 2 decades. Since he and his band of merry men at Porto shocked the world back in 2004 to lift that season's Champions League, Mourinho has been a serial winner. One of his greatest achievements, however, must be the 2010 Champions League title he won with Inter Milan. With an ageing team, the oldest to win it in history in fact, the Portuguese defied all odds to deliver Inter's first trophy in the top European competition since 1965. But how? Stay with us to find out. First and foremost, let's have a little look at his style of play. Like any good football man, Jose Mourinho has that rare gift of being able to get the best out of whoever happens to be at his disposal. We've seen it time and time again over the years, first evidenced with that Porto team we briefly mentioned. Having won Europe's understudy trophy, the UEFA Cup, the season previous, Mourinho, with helps of the like of Deco and Ricardo Carvalho, would go one better a year later against another plucky underdog, Didier Deschamps' Monaco. Mourinho had the ability to instill a sort of siege mentality into his troops, no matter what obstacle were in front of them, whether it be financial constraints or teams with more renowned players. He would make it abundantly clear that it was us against them, and they were all in it together. Nowhere would this be more clear than with Inter a few years later. Of course, after success in his native Portugal, Roman Abramovich decided to take a punt on him, installing him as his first Chelsea manager post-Ranieri. And it proved to be a masterstroke. Mourinho showed what he could do with a bigger budget and brought a style of football to the bridge which hadn't been seen in, well, ever. With marauding wingers such as Damien Duff and Arjen Robben, as well as Frank Lampard's goals from midfield, Chelsea could finally threaten the dominance of the big two at the time, Arsenal and Manchester United, doing so with a thrilling style of football. Next up, let's talk Inter. After Mourinho's first spell at Chelsea ended somewhat acromoniously in 2007, he decided to take a few months out of the game. But when Inter Milan came calling in 2008, Jose knew it was a project he could sink his teeth into. Milan are one of the few sides in Europe that people know and love and hold in the highest of regards, so it was a no-brainer for someone of Mourinho's stature to take on. They were also in a pretty decent position on the domestic scene too, having won 3 Scudettos in a row when the special one took charge. The problem though was that under previous incumbent Robert Mancini, they weren't doing enough on the European scene. Of course, with Mourinho's nous and tactical expertise, the Inter hierarchy was sure they had found their man. Inter had last won the European Cup back in the mid-60s, after a shocking refereeing performance in the semi-final against Liverpool had given them safe passage to play in their own stadium in the final against Benfica. It has since come to light that with the notorious match fixer Jose Maria Ortiz de Mendibel in charge, Italian teams almost never lost. After reaching the final 2 more times over the following years, but not managing to win it, a long period in the European wilderness followed for Inter, until Mourinho showed up, that is. Let's take a closer look at that 2010 team now. As we mentioned, Inter were already reigning champions in Italy when Mourinho arrived, and he had the humility, somewhat surprisingly, to not completely dismantle the team and instead decide to just add his own little tweaks. In came Sully Montari in the summer of 2008 to add much-needed legs and strength to replace flair players such as Santiago Solari and Alvaro Recoba, both of whom were deemed surplus to requirements. The frustrating Adriano had finally let go, fresh off another well-publicised battle with alcohol. Through the door came Hernan Crespo, a man with a wealth of experience to replace him at the top end of the pitch. The only thing that was lacking, with the exception of Montari and an 18-year-old by the name of Mario Balotelli, in and around the squad was youth. Inter's back four, which consisted of players such as Ivan Cordoba and Javier Zanetti, were all the wrong side of 30, and it didn't get much better as you headed further up the pitch either. The following season, Mourinho would add the superb Wesley Sneijder to the midfield, whilst also bringing in one Samuel Eto'o from Barcelona, plus €48 million, with Zlatan heading off in the opposite direction. Mourinho would famously claim that Eto'o is not worth even €1 less than Ibra, suggesting he was happy with the deal. Arguably, his 2 most important signings in the summer of 2009, however, came with much less fanfare. World Cup winning centre-back Lucio was signed for just €7 million, adding so much needed pace to an ageing defence, whilst Diego Milito was brought in from Genoa for €28 million, in what could be the most underrated bit of business in Inter's long history. Lucio allowed Inter's defence to press higher up the pitch and not invite attacks on as much, something which had seen them come unstuck the previous season against United. So how did Mourinho manage to bring it all together? Well, Mourinho is and always has been a manager who is appointed for big moments. As the final whistle blew in the Bernabeu on May the 22nd, 2010, a stadium he would soon grace as boss, the Inter faithful could simultaneously celebrate their Portuguese boss and being crowned champions of Europe for the third time. But for a moment, it seemed as though it was a little touch and go. After his first season in charge, which brought more domestic success, but failure in Europe having been knocked out by Manchester United, Mourinho knew he was almost there, but not quite. With the arrival of Sneijder, the Portuguese tried a new 4-3-1-2 centred around the Dutchman, but it failed to pay off, with Inter drawing their first 3 Champions League group games. Of course, Mourinho is a master tactician, and instead of just ripping it up and starting again, he decided to just tweak it a little, moving Samuel Eto'o out to the left and playing a revolutionary 4-2-3-1. However, it was his masterclass in the semis against Barcelona which showed just how tactically astute he was. Inter's holding midfielders completely nullified Lionel Messi and exploited both fullbacks as they ran out 3-1 winners. As Thiago Motta saw red early in the second leg, Mourinho's men were up against it. But what transpired was a defensive performance the likes of which they'll write books about. Faced with Barcelona's fearsome attacking talents, the 10 men of Inter stood firm, and in a scene reminiscent of Russell Crowe's Gladiator, repelled everything Barca had to throw at them. And we all know what happened next, as Diego Milito took centre stage to bring the trophy back home to San Siro in the final. Arguably, the cherry on top of the cake had been added in January, as Mourinho scoured Europe in search of a forward who would take the load of Milito and Eto'o. He found his man relatively close to home as he raided fellow Serie A side Lazio, bringing in Macedonian ace Goran Pandev. Pandev fit the European system perfectly, but there was talk in the Italian media that Mourinho could have lost his job in the run-up to the Champions League final, as Inter registered just 5 wins in 15 league games. Of course, that never transpired, thankfully for Inter fans. So how did he convince these guys they were the best team in the world? One of Jose Mourinho's best qualities, or at least one that he plays on the most, is convincing his teams that everyone is against them and he wants to see them lose. This fosters that siege mentality that we spoke of earlier and brings the group much closer together. Convincing any group that the world is against them will obviously do wonders for team morale and will ensure that players will run through brick walls for each other. Mourinho pulled the same stunt at Porto and again at Chelsea, but nowhere was it more apparent than at Inter Milan in 2009 to 2010. Of course, this sort of attitude can prompt neutrals to turn against you, which is probably what Mourinho wanted in all fairness. A master of mind games, Bobby Robson's old translator convinced a lot of his elder statesmen that his opportunity also represented their last chance of winning a European trophy. A fact of which wasn't lost on the likes of Cordoba, Zanetti, Stankovic, etc. Is that all there is to it? Hardly. Jose Mourinho has proven time and time again that he's up there with the best of them when it comes to tactics. He is just as comfortable sending his teams out to nullify opponents and see out a game as he is letting his big guns off the leash, which he did with aplomb during his first spell at Chelsea in particular. Of course, you cannot please everybody, and there have been accusations levelled at Mourinho in the past that his methods are anti-football. But not all managers can walk into the biggest job in the world of football with unlimited budgets like Pep Guardiola seems to continually do. As we know, Mourinho became the first man to win all 3 European trophies as his Roma side lifted the inaugural Conference League last season. And he's looking to go one better this time out, as Roma take on perennial winners Sevilla in the Europa League final this season. Jose Mourinho is a born winner. Teams know exactly what they're going to get with him, and although it's not always to everybody's liking, the man simply gets results. Right now, the Portuguese appears to be in the autumn of his career with Roma, but it would be a brave man to bet against him becoming European champion one more time before he calls it a day. Do you guys think that he has what it takes? As always, thanks for dropping in us today, and remember to swing by again next time, where we'll be discussing loads more fun bits and pieces. And why not do us a big favour by liking and sharing today's video, whilst also subscribing to our channel. Bye guys!